There was a time when entire families depended on backyards no bigger than a parking space to feed themselves. During World War II, supply chains were strained, food imports dropped, and ration books became a part of daily life. Yet something remarkable happened. Ordinary people transformed scraps of land into highly productive food systems that produced full, balanced meals. Not just herbs or a few vegetables, but potatoes, beans, greens, and even protein sources, all from tight, carefully planned spaces. This wasn't hobby gardening, it was survival gardening, done with precision, discipline, and ingenuity. And here's the part that matters today. These methods weren't dependent on modern tools, fertilizers, or technology. They were based on principles that still work, especially if you're dealing with limited space, rising food costs, or simply want greater control over what you eat. If you've ever looked at your yard and thought it's too small to matter, WWII gardeners would strongly disagree. They treated every inch of soil like it had a purpose. Backyard growers during the war didn't waste space. They used intensive planting techniques that packed crops tightly together without harming yields. Instead of wide rows with empty soil in between, they planted in blocks. Carrots sat next to onions, lettuce filled gaps between cabbage, and fast-growing crops were tucked in wherever sunlight reached. This method, often called intercropping today, allowed multiple harvests from the same patch of land. A small yard could produce a steady rotation of food rather than a single seasonal crop. For example, a modern gardener could plant spinach between rows of tomatoes early in the season. The spinach is harvested before the tomatoes fully spread, effectively doubling productivity without expanding space. They relied on succession planting to keep food coming year-round. We gardeners didn't plant once and wait. They planted continuously. As soon as one crop was harvested, another went into the ground. This created a steady flow of food rather than overwhelming harvests followed by scarcity. For instance, after harvesting early peas, they would immediately plant beans in the same soil. When lettuce was cut, root vegetables like beets or turnips would take their place. The key was timing and preparation. Soil was kept fertile and ready, so nothing sat idle. Today, this can be applied by planning your garden in waves. Instead of planting all your lettuce at once, plant small batches every 2 weeks. You'll avoid waste and maintain a constant supply. They turned kitchen waste into powerful fertilizer. With commercial fertilizers scarce, people relied on composting long before it became popular again. Vegetable peels, eggshells, coffee grounds, and even ash from fireplaces were returned to the soil. This created nutrient-rich compost that kept gardens productive without outside inputs. Nothing was wasted, you know. Even small households could maintain soil fertility using everyday scraps. A practical modern approach is simple, really. Keep a compost bin or pit. Add food scraps regularly. Mix in dry materials like leaves and turn it occasionally. Within weeks, you'll have rich organic matter that improves soil structure and boosts yields. They grew calorie-dense crops, not just easy ones. Wartime gardeners focused on foods that actually sustained people. Potatoes, beans, peas and cabbage were staples because they provided energy, protein and essential nutrients. Leafy greens were important, but they weren't the backbone of survival. Calories mattered, plain and simple. A small patch of potatoes could feed a family far more effectively than decorative plants or low-yield crops. If you're applying this today, prioritize crops that offer real nutritional value per square metre. A few square metres of potatoes, combined with beans climbing vertically, can significantly contribute to a household's food supply. They used vertical space to expand beyond the ground. Limited land didn't stop productivity. Gardeners used trellises, fences, and simple wooden frames to grow crops upward. Beans, peas, and even squash were trained to climb, freeing up ground space for other plants. This effectively multiplied the usable growing area. Instead of a flat garden, they created layers of production. In a modern yard, even a wall or balcony railing can serve this purpose. A vertical frame supporting climbing beans can turn a narrow strip into a highly productive food source. They mastered cold frames to extend the growing season. One of the most overlooked techniques was the use of cold frames. These simple structures, essentially boxes with glass or clear covers, captured heat and protected crops from frost. Even in harsh conditions, gardeners could grow greens through winter. This was critical during the war, when fresh produce was scarce outside the main growing season. Cold frames allowed year-round production in even the smallest spaces. Here are some of the lesser-known techniques they used to make cold frames incredibly effective. They angled the glass lid to capture maximum sunlight during shorter winter days. They insulated the sides with straw or soil to retain heat overnight. They used darker soil or compost to absorb and store warmth. They opened the frames slightly during the day to prevent overheating. They planted cold hardy crops like kale, spinach and winter lettuce. They layered manure beneath the soil to create gentle bottom heat. They rotated crops even inside the frame to avoid nutrient depletion. They positioned frames facing south for maximum sun exposure. They used salvaged windows instead of new materials. They kept frames low to the ground to reduce heat loss. They watered sparingly to avoid freezing conditions. They harvested regularly to encourage regrowth. They protected frames from wind using fences or walls. They staggered planting dates inside the frame. They repaired and reused materials season after season. These days, a simple version can be built with just a wooden box and a transparent lid. Even a repurposed plastic container can work, especially in warmer climates. This really allows you to grow food when others simply can't. They planned meals, not just gardens. Perhaps the most important lesson here is that WWII gardeners didn't grow randomly. They planned their gardens based on what their families actually needed to eat. Crops were selected to complement each other, both nutritionally and practically. A typical setup might include potatoes for calories, beans for protein, cabbage for storage, and carrots for vitamins. Together, these formed complete, sustaining meals. Today, this approach can truly transform how you garden. Instead of just planting whatever is convenient, think in terms of meals. What combination of crops will actually feed you? They proved, really, that small spaces can produce big results. The real takeaway is quite simple. Size wasn't the limiting factor, strategy was. With careful planning, continuous planting, and smart use of space, even the smallest yard became a reliable food source. These weren't ideal conditions by any stretch. They were tough, uncertain times. Yet people adapted and thrived, using methods that honestly are still within reach today. If you're serious about self-reliance, food security, or just getting more out of your land, these lessons are well worth putting into practice. If you found this valuable and want more deep dives into forgotten survival techniques and real historical strategies, make sure to subscribe and share this with someone who takes self-sufficiency seriously.